China is showing some signs of compromise in talks with the U.S., but heading off a trade war that has kept the global markets on edge is still far from a done deal. Joining us now, President Trump's point man in the negotiations, Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin. Mr. Secretary, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you.
After 2 long days of talks, Thursday and Friday, where are we, on the one hand, on China agreeing to buy $200 billion more of U.S. goods in return for the U.S. dropping tariffs on $150 billion of Chinese goods?
Well, Chris, I'm pleased to report that we've made very meaningful progress, and we agreed on a framework, which is important to understand. And the framework includes their agreement to substantially reduce the trade deficit by increasing their purchases of goods. We also discussed very important structural issues that they're going to make in their economy to make sure that we have a fair ability to compete there, and also protections about technology, which have been very important to the president.
But China, and one of the big things the president has said is he wants them to reduce the deficit by $200 billion, by $200 billion more of U.S. goods. They reportedly refused to agree to that specific target. There's nothing about a specific target in the statement. One, have they refused to agree to a target, and is there still the possibility of a trade war?
Well, Chris, we're putting the trade war on hold. So right now we have agreed to put the tariffs on hold while we try to execute the framework. The president has been very clear since the first meeting with President Xi in Mar-a-Lago that we are going to reduce the trade deficit. We have an agreement with China that they will substantially agree to it. I would just comment that ultimately these are not government-to-government transactions. It's not a giant purchase order with us. We are immediately going to follow this up with Secretary Ross going there with very hard commitments in agriculture, where we expect to see a very big increase, 35% to 40% increases in agriculture this year alone. In energy, doubling the energy purchases. I think that you could see $50–60 billion a year of energy purchases over the next 3 to 5 years. And strategically, that's very important for us and very important for them.
But just to lock down 2 points, sir. One, no specific target of $200 billion.
Chris, we have specific targets. I'm not going to publicly disclose what they are. They go industry by industry. And as I said, not only do we have targets, but ultimately this is about industry being able to have hard contracts and deliver these goods.
And as far as the president's threat first of $50 billion in tariffs on Chinese goods and $150 billion, those are all on hold.
They are. And the president had a very productive meeting with the vice premier in the Oval Office with all of us and the vice president. He heard these commitments himself, and he can always decide to put the tariffs back on if China doesn't go through with their commitments.
Now, President Trump shocked a lot of people this week when he tweeted this. Let's put it up on the screen. President Xi of China and I are working together to give massive Chinese phone company ZTE a way to get back into business fast. Too many jobs in China lost. The Trump administration has banned U.S. companies from selling components to ZTE. The president indicated that perhaps he would be willing to end that ban, which resulted in this exchange. Take a look.
President Xi asked me to look at it. I said I would look at it, but anything we do with ZTE is always, it's just a small component of the overall deal.
President Trump bemoans too many jobs in China lost. What about American jobs?
Now, the issue with ZTE is that they violated our sanctions for selling goods to Iran and North Korea. Is ZTE part of these trade talks, and is President Trump willing to relax the ban on U.S. companies selling components to ZTE?
So, Chris, I don't know why anybody's surprised about this, so let me give you the facts. President Xi asked President Trump to look into this. That's not a surprise. President Trump often asks other leaders to look into things that are important to our companies. The president asked Secretary Ross to look into it, okay? And that's what Secretary Ross, this is an enforcement issue. It's not a trade issue. We didn't agree to any quid pro quo. And Secretary Ross will make sure that the enforcement issue is in, but in a way that's good for American companies. And I'm not going to go through the discussions on the enforcement issue. That was completely independent of our trade negotiations.
But we just had the soundbite of President Trump saying it's a small component of the overall deal. He seems to be linking ZTE with the trade talks.
Again, the president asked us to look into it as part of the delegation, and that's what we did. I can assure you, and you know I'm very involved in all the sanctions issues myself, I can assure you that whatever changes we make to the enforcement issue on ZTE, we will be protecting American technology, American jobs, and make sure that the secretary is comfortable with enforcement. This is an enforcement issue, and I can assure you the president wants us to be very tough on ZTE, and all he did was ask the secretary to look into this.
Okay. President Trump also suggested that President Xi, Chinese President Xi, may be using his leverage with Kim Jong-un relative to a summit to get a better trade deal with the U.S. Take a look.
It could very well be that he's influencing Kim Jong-un. We'll see what happens, meaning the president of China, President Xi, could be influencing Kim Jong-un.
Now, the president has suggested before that if Xi is helpful with regard to North Korea, then he, the President Trump, might go easier on China on a trade deal. Is the whole issue of a Trump-Kim summit and President Xi's conceivable role in that, is that part of trade talks?
Well, it is only part of trade talks in the sense of I had very direct conversations with the vice premier because, you know, I'm responsible for sanctions, and I have a commitment from them that they are going to continue to enforce the sanctions that are in place, and this is very important. And China has the same objective as we do. They want to get rid of the nuclear weapons.
So we're not going easier on China in the trade talks to try to get Xi's help for a summit?
I don't think we're going easy on the trade talks at all. I think for the first time, okay, many presidents haven't dealt with this issue. President Trump's dealt with this issue. He threatened to put on $150 billion of tariffs. We have a very good framework agreement that's not just about buying goods. It's about structural changes. It's about lowering tariffs. China has committed to lower tariffs on many things and make structural changes and protect our technology. So these are very important issues for the U.S. economy. And now we're going to make sure that this gets implemented.
All right. As if you didn't have enough on your plate, there's also NAFTA, our negotiations of the effort to renegotiate a trade deal with Canada and Mexico. And there are reports or speculation that prospects for a deal are diminishing after the administration missed a deadline this past week that had been set by House Speaker Paul Ryan for getting a deal done. What are the chances that NAFTA will be renegotiated and it'll be passed by Congress this year?
The president's more determined to have a good deal than he's worried about any deadline. So whether we pass it in this Congress or whether we pass it in the new Congress, the president is determined that we renegotiate NAFTA. That's something we're doing. I can tell you I've been in contact with the finance ministers in both Canada and Mexico. President Trump and Trudeau had a very good conversation last week. As Ambassador Lighthizer has said, we're still far apart, but we're working every day to renegotiate this agreement, and that's what we're focused on doing.
So you're suggesting the president is not setting any kind of deadline and might be willing to let this spill over into 2019?
I'm not saying he's willing to let it spill over. Okay, he has all his alternatives. I'm just saying right now we are focused on negotiating a good deal, and we're not focused on specific deadlines. I can tell you that Ambassador Lighthizer and others are still working around the clock on these negotiations with Canada and Mexico. We're far apart, but our objective is still to get a deal. Secretary
Mnuchin, thank you. Thanks for your time. You got a lot on your plate.
Very busy. Don't forget Iran sanctions, which we're also very focused on, Chris.
I actually wanted to ask you about that. Please come back and we'll discuss that as well. Coming up, Kim Jong-un threatens to cancel the Singapore summit, and President Trump says